Didn't see you there. You may be wondering, what am I exactly doing behind a trash can right now? Well, if you don't mind, I'm hunting rogue agents, so be very, very quiet. Matter of fact, there's one right there.
Please don't.
The rogue agent has been neutralized.
The Black Friday frenzy, an estimated 116 million shoppers hitting the stores.
Early, they say they can't have dinner with their families.
At an Alabama mall, shoppers scrambling for safety as gunfire rings out.
Everyone in America tends to want to celebrate, and it's just not something we can do now that we have to work all night.
The nation's biggest retailers, shoppers fighting over garments at this Victoria's Secret in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Not only to be competitive, but to meet our customers' requests.
Night, in fact. And not everyone is taking the news so well. Some employees are up in arms about giving up one of their favorite holidays.
You're wondering how far or how low can stores go.
Today we touch surfaces that are crawling with germs.
You can know a lot, you can know a little, but whatever you know.
Viral pneumonia has hit central China's Wuhan city. Authorities have reported 27 cases in total.
It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
So at least 565 people are dead and more than 28,000 infected with coronavirus around the world.
All right, this is getting serious.
Risk is low in the United States. Risk is low.
The city of love is exploding again, but those youngsters aren't listening.
One person with coronavirus in King County, Washington State, has died.
Protesters. 11 people have died from coronavirus.
Tonight, the first containment zone here in America within a 1-mile radius in the New York suburb of New Rochelle.
We need to contain and mitigate within our own country. Bottom line, it's going to get worse.
On the date of March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization, or WHO, would determine the coronavirus as a global pandemic, and soon the world would begin to shut down. While the world in the next couple of months would be able to open up again, and society would soon bring itself back, the death toll would only sit at a little over 7 million worldwide of people who would lose their life to the new virus. But according to Tom Clancy's The Division, this is not the case. Instead, in 2015 on Black Friday, just a week or so after, the world would start to crumble to a new disease named the dollar flu. Just this time, the world wouldn't come back from this. A man by the name of Dr. Amos Gordon would, in the attempt to cause a natural wipe of humanity to fix population issues and environmental damage. Dr. Amos would create a virus out of multiple different viruses put together, such as dengue, Ebola, H1N1, hantavirus, Marburg, and swine flu, and put this artificially created virus on the dollar bill and handed it into a store in New York while purchasing. 95% of the population would be vulnerable to this virus, while 30% of people infected would eventually see fatal results, with this virus being able to kill a person in 7 to 9 days. With that being said, it was also noted that the disease is able to remain dormant for months, rather off the body of someone already dead or any surface, creating an infection zone in wherever it is present. Just a couple months after the outbreak, with almost 30% of those being affected dying, it would only take about 2 months before the US itself would start to succumb to complete collapse and ran under martial law. This is where you come in. An unidentified division agent who would be sent into New York in order to bring peace back to the city and squash the opposing threats to the best of your ability. The division, also known as the Strategic Homeland Division, or abbreviated as SHADE, is a massive wave of sleeper agents who would be activated in the event of a nationwide collapse, in hopes of having a force capable of fixing an apocalyptic event. The first wave of division agents would be sent out first, but eventually the entire wave would be determined KIA, or AWOL. eventually you would be sent out in the second wave to New York. So what's the story here? Well, in 2016, The Division would be released on March 8th as Ubisoft's sort of response to Bungie's Destiny in a competition to see who can be the world's best bullet sponge looter shooter. This game would then go on to see the release of 3 different expansions in the same year. The Division on June 28th would see the release of Underground, a DLC in which you tackle the remains of numerous enemy factions in the subway systems of New York in order to wipe out any chance of a resurgence. This DLC wouldn't be anything crazy, as each mission would just feel like a directionless campaign to just fill in the blank space of an endgame, and then, eventually a few months later, Ubisoft would change things up and do something new with their next DLC named Survival. This DLC would be released on November 22nd and would change the game and the way we play it as we know. Near the back of the base of operations is where you'll find the hub, which once descending down the stairs will lead into an open area with multiple different vendors. This is also where players can access each of the 3 DLCs as they wish, with Underground being down the stairs on the left and Last Stand being in the back right corner. Close to the right is where players can access Survival Mode. Inside this location is a window with what seems to be an equipment room for biohazard equipment, and upon starting a new game, you will be immediately greeted with a cutscene explaining what your purpose in the mission is.
Better get yourself into a hazmat suit, Agent. We just got word that the experimental antivirals lost in the Dark Zone have been located. There's no time to wait. You and a team need to go secure them right now, or someone else will.
Come on, move it! We don't have much time! We need to be in the air before the storm hits!
But we've got a storm coming in. They say it'll make Sandy look like a snowball fight. We're locking the base down for the duration, and Rhodes says the weather might bork all our comms, so we can't count on being in contact.
Hold on! We'll be there soon!
Just get there before the storm really hits. And listen, do whatever you need to do to get back alive. You're needed. Row out.
Warning. Vital signs indicate probable infection.
Immediately after the crash, your character is awoken inside of what seems to be a safe house, and Isaac instantly notifies you that an infection is detected in your bloodstream. Off the bat, you learn that you have 60 minutes to live unless you can slow down the timer over time with medicine, which turns out that your not so comfy landing and cutscene ended up giving you tinnitus. So time is of the essence. After looking around the safe house, you can loot a couple of bags and also familiarize yourselves with the crafting bench, which will become more useful later on. Upon stepping outside the safe house, you are immediately thrown into a harsh, frozen winds of a snowstorm, while you are presented with the dark and desolate streets of New York. In the top left of the screen, a red bar starts to sync as you soon will need to find warmth before going hypothermic. Next to that bar is how cold it is at the moment alongside the temperature of the clothing you are wearing can withstand. Immediately, not only are you struggling to fight the disease timer, but you are now presented with a much more immediate issue. While the affection is used to force the player to progress accordingly, the cold is a threat to use against the player to move more smartly. These two come together to prove an almost dire situation that you find yourself in. In order to slow the disease down, you will have to find random medicine and painkillers rather off of enemies or medical bags that you loot while roaming the streets. In order to find warmth, you must find fire barrels rather lit or ones you can light, abandoned outlet stores, or garages or cars that just happen to recently be on fire. And sometimes there will be people who aren't really wanting to share that warmth with you, so in some events you just might have to fight.
Temperature is below.
While progressing through streets, you will bump into numerous groups of hostiles that easily outgun you and outnumber you, so it's up to you on whether you feel as you should fight, or if needed with the lowered vision and sound of the storm, you can make an easy getaway if you need to sneak around groups. And if it couldn't get any worse, on top of all of this, unlike your enemies, you are very squishy and will die very fast if you find yourself in not such a good location. In this game mode, as a beginner, you will probably find yourself dying over and over and over again. This is where medkits become your holy grail, as contrary to the base game, medkits are a very uncommon healing item that can become your make it or break it, as it is your only means to revive yourself. If things go south on top of this, enemies will make it a priority to finish you off, so make sure you revive yourself not in front of any man who just shot you down. So with all being said, it is crucial that you learn how to not only pick your fights or to sneak, but in the event that you have no other choice, you will have to learn how to best position yourself, who to prioritize in combat, and if needed to fall back and rather evade or fight from a further distance. Another thing to note is you are not alone in this world. In the event that you run into another agent fighting, you can help them clean up their mess and eventually invite them to a group. Grouping up with other agents is never a bad idea and can make this game even easier for yourself, as not only do you have an extra battle buddy, but if you go down or are finished, your newfound friend can revive you with a medkit, so make sure to always have one or two on you at all times. You also have the ability to find and revive random unconscious players that may have gone down near you if you got the chance. Alternatively, when launching survival, you can choose PvP mode, which serves as a way to not only battle other agents for loot and survival, but also grant you usually an easy set of loot. Once finding warmth from a safe house, you can use Isaac, your smartwatch, which guides you through everything to open a map of the city to figure out where you need to go. On the map, you have a very few icons, but each icon will guide you to a different one if needed. Purple fists will appear on the map frequently, which are considered landmarks, which in turn are locations that our harder enemies are found, while also having heaps of loot spread around their locations. Engaging the enemies in the landmarks, although being a tougher fight, can provide warmer clothes, better armor, and even better weapons to help you progress through your environment. Next up, you got helicopter crashes. These are lesser found landmarks that can provide you with a lot of free resources such as medical supplies, materials, clothes, food, and water, and sometimes, if you're lucky, a weapon. These locations will most likely have a fire barrel to provide warmth, and you will also have no enemies, and if so, the enemies you find will be way easier than landmark enemies. Aside from those two other map indicators will be nearby fire barrels, and also shelters such as stores or abandoned apartments that you can hide in for cover or warmth if needed. Lastly, you have your Dark Zone, which is your final destination, which you will spend most of your time preparing to enter. A best indicator to understand your enemy difficulty will be how close you are in accordance to the Dark Zone, whereas on the outskirts of the Dark Zone, you could even potentially run into elite enemies roaming the streets. Enemies you encounter during your run will be among three categories of enemies ranking in difficulty, starting with normal as red, then veteran with purple, and finally elite with gold. With each rank, your enemies will do more damage, shoot faster, move more aggressive, and also be harder to kill. The combat in this game mode is actually a better atoned against the Division normal bullet sponge issue, whereas enemies will still be a bit spongy, but will only remain as strong as their rank. Each different faction enemy you run into will engage in combat way differently than the other, and each different variety of enemies there are will all act differently in order to eliminate you. For example, all grenaders will try to flush you out of cover, while rushers will try to swarm you, snipers will tend to do high damage from afar, and engineers will try to lock down a sector with a turret to make your life harder. Each faction's version of these enemies also act differently together. For example, Rikers will tend to group up and wait for you to try and peek them, while LMB soldiers will push you from multiple angles in an attempt to overwhelm you. As you are fighting your way through the streets of New York, you will soon realize looting is a big part of this game. Looting is pretty much how you get any material or any resource you might need to make your way through your run. When finding clothes, you can constantly upgrade the amount of cold resistance your character has by replacing or adding new warmer clothes that you find to your appearance tab, which is something that is new for this game. On the other side of looting, you'll tend to find that different bags and boxes will drop different specific resources. For example, a briefcase will drop clothes, while a toolbox will of course drop tools. From most normal boxes or bags, you can find soda cans, water bottles, energy bars, and canned food, all being useful for when your character becomes thirsty or hungry. Now, I'm not sure if hunger affects your character, but eating will cause your character to be able to locate loot way easier whenever you're searching through an area. Each one of these resources will also go up in rarity depending on where you are looting, and all play a big part in the workbench you find inside of hideouts. The workbench is very important as it is required for you to craft a virus filter which is needed before you are allowed to enter the Dark Zone. Here you will also find multiple various other tabs such as medical, clothes, armor, weapon, gadgets, attachments, mods, and resource upgrades. Depending on how close your safe house is to the Dark Zone is what makes or breaks your ability to craft certain gadgets, as some will be unattainable in earlier safe houses, mainly the medical abilities. Additionally, here you can also craft extra medkits or a medkit pouch in the medical tab, which grants you the ability to carry more medkits. And with resources, you can convert green resources into blue and eventually blue into gold. If you have enough of each resource, you can make a better version. Stockpiling green and blue resources can be very helpful, as it will allow for you to make mass-produced items when you need them. When it comes down to materials, tools, medical items, and electronics will be mainly used for gadgets. Fabric can be used to craft warmer clothes or better armor, and weapon parts will obviously be used to craft better weapons or configure attachments if you feel the need to make some. The game allows you to craft a good variety of gadgets such as a healing ability, a scanner which shows you how many threats are in your area, other stuff such as a riot shield or grenade launcher, but most importantly here you can craft a turret which can be used to distract and deal extra damage to enemies, and you can also craft a healing station which when placed will periodically heal you during combat, but also the event you are knocked down, it will revive you if you are in its radius. The Dark Zone plays a role essentially as your endgame of your survival run. While the entirety of your first 30 minutes of the run is mainly you trying to get as warm and powerful as you can before entering the Dark Zone, once crafting the virus filter, you can hop the wall and start your trek through the more difficult and violent streets of what was once the mass grave for virus containment that military set up during the outbreak. The Dark Zone acts as a skill check for players as enemies you encounter roaming in the streets start to not only appear as higher ranks, but in larger crowds, making each fight you get into way more difficult and technical. Also, the storm isn't as apparent anymore once in the Dark Zone, so while temperature doesn't become much of an issue anymore, you're not as concealed, making it so falling back is way less of an option than it used to be. Right off the bat, Isaac notifies you of the nearest antiviral cache, which brings you back to the main objective of the entire run. Now, interesting enough, resistance around the specific cache is not very big, as you'll only come across 1 or 2 red bar enemies that are actually guarding it. Your real challenges in the Dark Zone are the numerous amounts of landmarks you can find around. While these give you the ability to loot for high-end gear and materials, actually securing these zones are a huge challenge, as every enemy inside of a Dark Zone landmark are all elite enemies who will very well work together to eliminate you as fast as possible and to create a very difficult challenge. Luckily, these landmarks aren't actually required, as you can just grab the antivirals and immediately head to the nearest extraction site. But before extraction, you will be forced to visit a safe house and craft a flare gun, which you are given the materials to do so once retrieving the antivirals. Once making your way to the extraction site, this is where your biggest challenge yet comes in. While exploring the Dark Zone, you will notice many other Division agents who previously before you met a deadly foe that immediately mutilated them, specifically for what seems to be their watch, as their bodies are obviously stripped of their tech and mainly their hands are missing. Once getting closer to the extraction, you will begin to see agents strung up the walls or hanging, or other agents with axes stuck in their body from whatever their fatal encounter must have been. Upon firing your flare, Isaac will notify you about an unidentified communication line appearing. Then in a cloud of smoke, a singular gold hostile will appear and immediately disrupt all of your electronics, creating static across your screen and also disabling the ability to use your gadgets. It immediately becomes clear you are being hunted by a hunter. The hunter, in my opinion, is one of my favorite enemies I've ever came across in a game, as this enemy will do everything in its ability to outmaneuver you and make your life as hard as possible to kill it. The hunter is an enemy that will almost replicate fighting another player, as the hunter will deploy gadgets to deal damage to you, while also deploying gadgets to heal themselves. This enemy will hold angles on you in gunfights and deal consistent damage to you, or, if things get close, the hunter will immediately finish you with a single blow from their axe, which will result in a brutal finisher, and an end to your game. The hunter will spawn in different variants with different weapon loadouts, while also having different sets of gadgets to use against you. All hunters have the ability to run away from you and hide and heal if their health gets too low in order to stay in the fight. Hunters will vault, roll, and hide behind cover in order to fight as technical as possible, and some of the strategies I found best is saving specific gadgets such as stun grenades, which will allow you to stun the enemy from fleeing or shooting back, and allowing you to riddle the enemy with bullets until you eventually become victorious. After killing the hunter, you will be picked up by the extraction helicopter, and your division survival run is complete. Congratulations, you have just survived.
In the air and returning to base.
Happy to have you back online, Agent. I was worried about you there. The storm's passed and things are looking up. Get back here when you can.
Away from the game mechanically, what makes this game special to me is a mix between the atmosphere, gameplay, and a good bit of nostalgia. I played this game heavily during the winter of my freshman to sophomore year of high school, so whenever I think of winter, I always usually think about eating cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie, while quietly trying to survive with the dark snowy days of winter right outside of my house. I specifically wanted to come back to this game and talk about it as a fellow YouTuber by the name of Madman Epic made a video titled The Best Extraction Shooter That Time Forgot. This video alone is really good, and I'll link it in the description, so feel free to go watch it. Moving on, when it comes down to an atmosphere of this game, it's almost as unparalleled experience when it comes down to survival shooters that you won't really find anywhere else. The fact that you are always outnumbered and the enemies you come across seem to want you very dead brings this overwhelming feeling of loneliness, as most of the time the only person you can rely on for survival is yourself. The connection I had with myself as I had to make decisions whether for the long run or whenever I had to react fast were all things that I was aware that I had to do. And with that being said, it's a weird feeling when you have to plan any type of movement on the sole basis that you are alone. The combat is another thing I heavily enjoy, as being able to quietly sneak around groups of enemy makes the stakes feel higher, as I am not in a situation where I can lose. If I make a bad decision and pay the consequences, then that is on me, and my run is over. Whenever you are engaged in combat, it's apparent that both you and your enemies are struggling to find each other, especially when you reposition mid-battle. Enemies will continue to shoot your last known location in an effort to take you down. When enemies are running down the street to close in on you at times, the only bit that you can see of them is their shadow in the snowfall as they appear closer and closer. This makes the enemies feel like they matter, and that I'm not just a superhero main protagonist, especially when you run into moments where you're running from multiple crowds of enemies. At times you will find yourself in situations that you just can't get yourself out of. All around, the experience of surviving while also trying to stay warm and halt your infection all work together to instill a great deal of danger and impending doom, that at all time you have to stay alert, and that you won't have the luxury to hang out and wait for the storm to blow over. Gameplay wise, I really do enjoy the feeling you get of winning in a landmark takeover or a street skirmish, that when you finally kill the last enemy in the area, you are welcome to the loot they drop and the multitude of lootable boxes around their area. Near the mid portion of your game, when you have stronger armor, warm clothes, and powerful guns, is a nice touch, as you are not only rewarded for being good at surviving, but you are now set. Not having to deal with finding warmth and not having to run away from weaker enemies is all in itself a fun and rewarding game style that just doesn't hand you the ability to be good, but instead makes you work for it. But Dark Zone, in my opinion, is a perfect kind of endgame that the feeling you get of jumping over that wall makes you feel like things are about to get real. Even after getting powerful and warm, it's a real test to see if you still have what it takes to survive even after all you have been through. Most importantly, I am a big fan of the hunters, and think that having the hunter fight at the end is such a good installed boss fight to have, as a sign of the only person who can take you down is someone who fights just like you. Finally, I just can't get enough of the city landscape, with how every portion of the city you walk through feels new and of its own challenge. How in some spots it's dark and very quiet, with not only is there no enemies in the area, but there's basically no fire barrels or shelters in some areas, making it feel more of a wasteland than it really is. While other sections of the city, who have heavily lit stores or stacked apartments with flaming cars line the streets, give you a heavy sense of chaos that would rampage through the streets of an apocalypse. Having to evade enemies by sticking to alleyways or taking shortcuts to rooftops to ensure survival are all just fun ways to make the city feel more real and immersive. One thing that stuck out the most is how at one point while looting, you'll find a dead man sitting on a bench with a tool bag and a sign on the front saying take what you need. It's almost as the game is showing you how hopeless surviving can be sometimes, especially if you have contracted a disease and now you're going to die in a few days. Overall, Tom Clancy's The Division Survival is an awesome gameplay experience that I believe more people should try out or be aware of. It honestly appalls me that this is a DLC and not its own game on how separate it plays from the main game itself, whereas if someone who has known The Division wanted to play Survival, they wouldn't even need to play the base game, as you could just go straight to the hub and load into the Survival match. Nothing you have outside of Survival goes in, and nothing you have in Survival goes out to the base game, so Ubisoft, if you could hear my distant voice in the wind, please do something similar to Rainbow Six Extraction and make a separate game for Survival, because you guys cooked with this one. Anyways, if you are watching this and have gone this far, I appreciate you and you are a real one, and maybe try this game out if you feel like it, but regardless, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.